Alexander Rossi, is he the villain IndyCar needs or is he the hero it deserves? That's the debate heading out of the Road America IndyCar race, and of course we will discuss it in great detail. But first, a personal announcement. I am going to be racing for real at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway at the USAC Battle at the Brickyard, July 5th through the 8th. We've already raised over $700 in sponsorship on my Indiegogo campaign page, but we can always use more as racing is an expensive proposition. So if you'd like, head over to my Indiegogo campaign, contribute as little as $1 to get involved with this program, and donations over $50 will not only get you a shout out on my vlog video that I will be filming there, but it'll also get your name on my cart for the race. So really exciting. Head over to my Indiegogo campaign and race with me at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So without any further ado, let's talk about Road America.
You can't roller skate in a buffalo herd. Can't roller skate in a buffalo herd.
So as we've kind of come to expect from Road America, it was a fantastic crowd, an enthusiastic crowd. I know a lot of people that were there were very happy about it, and it was a beautiful day. So couldn't really be any better in terms of a look for the series. Everybody seemed to have a good time, and certainly IndyCars belong at Road America, and that big crowd was treated to drama almost from the start of the race because Will Power's car did not get going on the start. It turned out it was a terminal engine issue. They did get the car repaired, or at least an attempt at a repair, got him back out there, but unfortunately the damage was done and they retired the car only one lap after they'd gotten him back out onto the circuit. Now what's interesting about this, and perhaps a bit conspiratorial from my perspective, is that both of the Verizon Team Penske cars had engine issues during the weekend prior to the race and after qualifying on the pole position. A Penske Verizon 1-2 sweep, might I add, on the front row. Joseph Newgarden had to do an engine swap. They discovered something in the engine that they didn't like. They pulled the engine out of it, put a new one in. So that's fairly interesting to me that two cars from the same team on the front row were affected by engine issues. Now, why they didn't change Will Power's engine prior to the start, clearly there was an issue. We'll never know. Another interesting point about Road America is the fact that the race started so early in the day, which I'm not going to complain about it. I don't think many of the people who attended will complain about this. But there was no morning warm-up, which is almost par for the course for road course racing, not only in IndyCar, but IMSA or Formula One or anything. What was kind of strange was the fact that nobody had any idea of what their cars were going to do when they fired them up, and Will Power's car blew up before the start. So yeah, we haven't seen that in a while, so it was just a very strange situation, and he actually kind of screwed over the guys in the outside of the front row, or the outside rows, all the way back. I know James Hinchcliffe was one of the guys who really got screwed over by that, but one of the guys who didn't get screwed over was Joseph Newgarden. Absolutely a dominant performance, which was kind of strange because it was a dominant performance, but it wasn't a dominant performance. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, because there were a lot of competitive cars, as we saw kind of in the opening laps of the race. Some incredible action. Spencer Pigot passing Simon Pagenaud around the outside of the former bridge turn, heading onto the main straight. Just I don't even know how he pulled that off. It was just one of those high commitment moves, I guess you could say, and just all sorts of battling through the field. Some fantastic racing, fantastically close racing. And I kind of said this on Twitter. I had watched the Formula One race from France at Paul Ricard, the Le Castellet circuit. And after watching that race, going straight to IndyCar, because the F1 race was kind of a late start, IndyCar was an early start, so they started right next to each other. I mean, it's just like night and day in terms of the competition level. It just the racing seems so close and so intense in IndyCar versus Formula One. And that's not necessarily a slam on Formula One. It's just such a contrast. And some people pointed out to me that it may have been the fact that Le Castellet is essentially a parking lot, and Road America is essentially, a classic road circuit. So that may have added to some of the intensity level of the racing. But no doubt about it, this was it's not going to be thought of as a classic race, but considering the last kind of few weeks and really the last month of IndyCar racing, it's been so dramatic and there's been so much controversy. A race like this, where it's just like a good, like a solid race. This was like a 7, 8 out of 10 race. It's not going to be remembered for any particular moments. It's not going to be one where everybody says, wow, remember that Road America race from 2018? But at the same time, you probably had 5 or 6 guys with race-winning cars, and that it was really spectacular. There were some, I mean, it was just really, I know I kind of make fun of people who are like, I want close racing. But I mean, this was close racing. There's no doubt about it. And there was certain excitement level to seeing the Scott Dixons, the Ryan Hunter-Reays, the Alexander Rossis, the Takuma Sato, Graham Rahal, all those guys, Robert Wickens, Sebastian Bourdais was up there early on until he had some electronics issues. All these guys up there able to kind of separate themselves from the rest of the field. This was kind of the first race of the season, I would say, where we really saw the talent really step up. At Road America, it seemed like this was the first race where everybody who was running up front, I could point to and say those were the top 10 guys in this race, at least running probably like 10 laps into the race, are probably the 10 most talented guys in the series, or at least the guys who qualified the top 10 in this race. It's like those are the most talented guys. There's the biggest talent pool right there. And we saw it, and it was absolutely it was a very interesting race from that perspective. Just seeing everybody on the top of their game, outside of Will Power, who had a mechanical issue, but everybody's cars seemed to be pretty good, and everybody was able to stay very close. Now, that being said, there was a lot of controversy that kind of came from the close racing, and it mostly centered around Alexander Rossi. Early on in the race, I think on lap 1 or 2, he sent a move on Robert Wickens, and a lot of people were kind of, ooh, I don't know about that, because he actually shoved Wickens off underneath the Corvette bridge. And then we thought, okay, well, that may be a one-off deal. Race control took no further action. Then later in the race, he made another move on my boy Takuma Sato, and pretty much the same thing. In some ways, it was a worse move because he kind of made even more contact with Sato, shoved him out on the same corner of the track, mind you, and unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which side of the Rossi debate you're on, he actually had a mechanical issue with the wheel bearing, something wrong with the front of the car. In fact, that was an issue that also had befallen Zach Veach. So we saw a lot of team trouble in terms of mechanical failures. But yeah, Alexander Rossi, yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about this. I'm actually personally, and a lot of people don't know this, I'm actually a pretty big fan of Rossi. If I had to kind of look at the drivers that are the drivers in IndyCar right now, a lot of people ask me that, oh, who's your favorite IndyCar driver? If you held a gun to my head, I'd probably say Rossi. Because I think his talent level is just unbelievable. But at the same time, he is a bit of a spark plug. And certainly this season, he's been at the center of controversy more times than not. But that's because of his aggressive driving style. So it's almost like Rossi has kind of become the guy that everybody wanted Sage Karam to be 2 or 3 years ago. The guy who wins, the guy who runs up front, the guy who is not afraid to push you out of the way to get a position, and he makes no apologies about that fact. I mean, he was so callous, I guess that would be the proper word, in his post-race interview with, I think it was Kevin Lee, just like, yeah, they shouldn't have been on the outside of me. I mean, it was... I think this is a good thing for the sport, because I think you need a driver that not everybody likes. I think and I think a lot of people have said this, Robin Miller has kind of been very vocal about it, that there needs to be a straight-up villain. I won't go that far, but I think you do need a few people that aren't necessarily universally liked. That's probably the one problem with IndyCar racing right now. Maybe you could look at a Will Power and say, okay, maybe not everybody likes him. But Will Power, at least in the last 7 or 8 years, hasn't really been a guy who's been a firebrand, a guy who's been willing to mix it up with people, and honestly, maybe go too far in some places and cause some contact or cause some wrecks. Now, I'm not saying that's a good thing, and certainly I believed that Rossi should have gotten a penalty for the second one on Sato. Maybe not the one with Wickens, maybe give him a warning on that one. But if you don't believe, if you look how far he was off the apex in turn 5, especially on the Sato one, I think if you don't call that as avoidable contact, I think you're a little bit off base, especially considering it was a second offense. But at the same time, he's stirred up certainly a lot of controversy. And the funny thing is, he's mixing it up with the guys that you would almost consider to be the good guys. The Takuma Sato, there are very few people who would say a bad thing about Takuma Sato because he's just such a nice guy. Robert Wickens is the same way, just a guy that you just kind of feel like, okay, yeah, he's a nice guy. And yet here's Alexander Rossi, who's like, yeah, you may be a nice guy, but I'm going to shove you out of the way. And I think this is a good thing. I think he's going to sell a lot of merchandise. I'm case in point on that one. You need these drivers to do things like this, and I think Rossi being the guy that maybe isn't thinking championship all the time like we saw at Detroit. You don't really know what he's going to do. You do know there's one guarantee about Rossi, and that is that he is going to absolutely give it 150%. So I think you have to respect that. And thankfully, you do have other guys who are very likable. Let's talk about a few of them real quick. Ryan Hunter-Reay. This is the funny thing, is that we probably had about 6 or 7 cars in this race today, or yesterday at the time I'm recording this, that would have been dominant cars in pretty much any other race. And yet there were probably 6 or 7 cars that were set up absolutely perfectly, and they were able to run kind of in that group, that breakaway group that we saw. And yet you saw some of the best drivers up at the front for sure. I think you saw the best driver from every team up at the front, that being Newgarden, Hunter-Reay, and Dixon from the 3 top teams. Now there may be some debate on that, but the 3 most solid drivers up at the front, they were in lockstep, as Marty Reed would say, and yet you saw Joseph Newgarden able to stay away from everybody, keep both Scott Dixon and Ryan Hunter-Reay, 2 of the most cagey veterans in the series, 2 of the fastest, cagiest veterans in the series, behind him for the whole race, despite the fact that everybody was pretty much on equal footing in terms of the cars. A lot of times when you see a dominant win, you can kind of say, okay, the car was better than everybody else's. I don't think you can say that about this performance by Joseph Newgarden. And that is kind of one of those things where you think, good grief, he did dominate that race, but it wasn't a boring dominance. It was really down to the driver. And I think this is the first real Aero Kit 2018 race that we can say that was won by Joseph Newgarden, the driver. It wasn't because of the setup. It wasn't because Penske has some trick parts or something. It was because he simply outdrove the best drivers in the sport. Speaking of, like I mentioned, Ryan Hunter-Reay, another sterling performance. I thought he drove a perfect race. Absolutely nothing was wrong with the way Ryan Hunter-Reay drove that race. He drove a race-winning race. He just wasn't fast enough to catch Joseph Newgarden. Scott Dixon. Holy smokes, Scott Dixon. If he doesn't win this championship, I would be very shocked. Absolutely shocked. Because the way he has performed since the Indy Grand Prix, where they went from the back to the front, finished second. You look at the Indianapolis 500, a car that absolutely should not have won, probably shouldn't have been in the Fast 9. They got in the Fast 9. They got points for that. They get in the race, they fuel mileage, and then Dixon, catching a yellow, drives to keep third. That was huge. Double points race, remember, Indianapolis. Detroit, Dixon. The first race in Detroit, how could you even... it was just amazing. Pit strategy from Mike Hull and the team. Everything is working so well, and Texas as well. Road America. He came from the back of the field to finish third. These moments for Scott Dixon, this is one of the... it's amazing to see a guy be this in tune to it. And it feels like we say this every week. And there's a lot of guys that talk about it every week, it seems like. Praising Robert Wickens every week. Praising Joseph Newgarden. Praising Alexander Rossi every week. Scott Dixon, my God, is he... again, if he doesn't clinch the championship by Sonoma, I'll make that prediction. I'll say it. If he doesn't clinch it by Sonoma, I think it's a disappointment. And if he's not the championship, it's an absolute embarrassment. Because there's just... Unless he has something absolutely go horribly wrong before the end of the season, there's no way he doesn't clinch it. He is truly the guy who's going to get this championship. And then, of course, we could talk about the drama with McLaren and the potential that Dixon's going to go there. I think we'll save that for another video. But it's just, this is some of the best driving out of Scott Dixon. And if you look at the measuring stick, Ed Jones, a driver who was very, very impressive last season. The 10 car is maybe not the prime car on that team. I think we all know that. But the fact that Ed Jones is trying to get into the top 10 while Scott Dixon is trying to get in the top 3, I think that's all down to Dixon. Well, it's all down to Dixon and his strategy from Mike Hull. I think that team is working so well together. It's really fantastic. But yeah, it was Joseph Newgarden taking the win. I will say that I was a little bit disappointed in Firestone this weekend. It didn't seem like the red Firestones and the black Firestones had enough delta between them. It just wasn't quite as exciting in terms of the tire strategy. And I think it kind of played out like an F1 race, to be honest with you. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because, again, the racing was close, fought, and of course it was caution-free. But it was definitely like everybody was pretty much on the same pit strategy. You saw overcuts and undercuts, especially from Scott Dixon, who was able to leapfrog positions by pitting laps later or sometimes laps earlier, depending on what tire they were going with. But outside of that, it was a pretty, again, it was a 7.5 out of 10. It was that kind of a race, and the real debate is going to be about Rossi and where he goes from here. Of course, we've got Iowa next, which is going to be one of those things where you look at Iowa Speedway and you say, okay, it's a bull ring. We've seen tempers flare there before. Rossi's one of the most aggressive guys on the ovals. Could we see more fireworks from Rossi? I certainly suspect we will. Joseph Newgarden is very good there. Ryan Hunter-Reay is very good there. I can't remember if Scott Dixon has a win there. I don't think he does. So we haven't really seen Scott Dixon particularly all that spectacular at Iowa. So is this a race where we're going to see some of those guys claw back points? I certainly think it's possible. But then again, we've seen with Scott Dixon, all he really needs to do is just finish in the top 3. And he doesn't necessarily have to go out there and win every race. So again, we'll see. Now, of course, the IndyCar Red Pill for Iowa is going to be a bit late because, of course, I am racing on the day, so I'm not going to be able to see the race probably unless somebody has a TV going of the race in the paddock. And then I'm going to be staying in Michigan for a couple days. My birthday's on the 10th. But hopefully by the end of the week of the 8th, I will have a video out for that. I'm also going to the 6 Hours of Watkins Glen this weekend, so if you're going to be there, be sure to say hi. And that's it. So yeah, Road America, again, probably a 7.5 out of 10 race. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, what you think about Rossi and whether he's a villain or a hero, or whether you like Rossi, you hate him. Just kind of leave me your thoughts down in the comments. Were you there at Road America? I know a few people were, so if you're watching this and you were there, leave your thoughts on the weekend down in the comments below. And yeah, maybe we'll be talking about McLaren here in a bit because, I mean, the stories that are coming out about McLaren coming into next year, I mean, it's some weird stuff. I mean, the fact that we're talking a 2-car team and maybe Scott Dixon leading it rather than Fernando. Is Fernando coming? Do we know that yet? Does Honda just want to disown Fernando? I don't know. There's so many things in that's layers upon layers upon layers. But anyway, yeah, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video, which will be talking, of course, about Iowa Speedway.